In 1982, Michael Jackson was driving down the Ventura Freeway with his assistant Nelson Hayes when something extraordinary happened. The melody for Billie Jean was playing in his head, consuming his every thought. He was so absorbed in the song that when a motorcyclist pulled up next to them and shouted, "Your car's on fire," Michael barely registered it. The entire bottom of his Rolls Royce was engulfed in flames, and he hadn't even noticed. That motorcyclist saved their lives. But here's the shocking part. When Michael brought that song into the studio, the producer who'd make it famous almost destroyed it. Quincy Jones didn't want Billie Jean on Thriller. He thought the intro was too long, the bass line didn't work, and the whole thing was too weak for the album. Michael Jackson had to fight to keep the song that would become the fastest rising #1 hit, with over 33 million copies sold in the United States alone. This is the story of how a song written in pure creative obsession, mixed 91 times, and nearly cut from the greatest album ever made, changed the sound of pop music forever. Billie Jean wasn't just a catchy pop song. It was Michael Jackson's response to years of psychological torment. Throughout the late 1970s and early 80s, Michael and his brothers dealt with obsessive fans who made false paternity claims. These weren't casual fan letters. These were persistent, escalating accusations from women they'd never met, claiming their children belonged to the Jackson brothers. One woman in particular haunted Michael starting in 1981. She sent him letter after letter, claiming he was the father of one of her twins. At first, he ignored them, like he learned to do. But she didn't stop. The letters became more intense. She told him they were destined to be together, that he was abandoning his own flesh and blood, that she loved him, and they'd raise the child as a happy family. Then came the final package. Inside was a photograph of herself, a gun, and a letter with specific instructions. She told Michael to kill himself at an exact time on a specific day. She would do the same after killing their baby, and they'd all be together in the afterlife. Michael kept that photograph on his dining room wall. When Rolling Stone writer Gary Hershey noticed it in 1983, Michael explained why it was there. "I want to memorize her face, in case she ever does turn up someplace." The woman ended up in psychiatric care, but the damage was done. Michael had nightmares. He became more reclusive, and he channeled all that fear, all that paranoia, all that violation of being accused of something he didn't do into 4 minutes and 54 seconds of pure musical genius. Michael Jackson knew Billie Jean was special from the moment it entered his mind. In his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalk, he described the feeling every musician lives for. A musician knows hit material. It has to feel right. Everything has to feel in place. It fulfills you, and it makes you feel good. You know it when you hear it. That's how I felt about Billie Jean. I knew it was going to be big while I was writing it. The bass line came first. That hypnotic walking 4-note pattern that's instantly recognizable 40 years later. It was looping in his head during a break from recording sessions at Westlake Studios in Los Angeles. He and Nelson Hayes got in Michael's Rolls Royce and headed down the Ventura Freeway just to clear his head, to let the creative process breathe. But Michael couldn't let it go. The melody was building. The rhythm was locking in. The words were forming. He was completely absorbed, existing in that flow state where time disappears and nothing else matters except the music taking shape in your mind. That's when the kid on the motorcycle appeared, gesturing frantically, yelling about fire. Michael and Nelson suddenly noticed the smoke. They pulled over. The entire undercarriage of the car was ablaze. If they'd kept driving, if the gas tank had caught, they could have died on that freeway. But even in the aftermath, even knowing how close they'd come to disaster, Michael's first thought wasn't about the fire. It was about not losing the song. Years later, he admitted he didn't fully process how dangerous it had been until much later, because Billie Jean was still the only thing that mattered in that moment. When Michael brought Billie Jean into Westlake Recording Studios in 1982, he knew it was the centerpiece of what would become Thriller. Quincy Jones, the legendary producer behind Off the Wall and the driving force of Michael's solo career, did not agree. According to multiple accounts, Jones felt Billie Jean was too weak to be included on the album. He hated the demo, he didn't like the bass line, and he especially wanted to cut that 29-second introduction, the iconic drum and bass opening that's now one of the most recognizable intros in music history. Jones even wanted to change the title. He pushed Michael to call it Not My Lover instead of Billie Jean, because he was worried people would confuse it with tennis star Billie Jean King. Michael refused. When Jones insisted on shortening the intro, Michael held firm. "That's the jelly," he told Jones. "That's what makes me want to dance." And when Michael Jackson tells you something makes him want to dance, you don't argue. The intro stayed. This wasn't unusual for their partnership. The entire Thriller album was a creative battleground where perfection was the only acceptable outcome. They recorded from April to November of 1982 with a budget of $750,000. Jones brought in 62 musicians and 22 singers. They worked for days and nights straight, pushing themselves and everyone around them to exhaustion. Engineers were carried out on stretchers. Musicians collapsed from fatigue. But Michael and Quincy kept going because they both understood they were creating something that had to be flawless. They just disagreed on what flawless meant for Billie Jean. Michael won that fight. But the real battle was just beginning. Bruce Sweetin was the engineer who made Thriller sound the way it does. His sonic innovations, his technical genius, his understanding of how to capture Michael Jackson's voice, all of it was essential to the album's success. He usually mixed a song once and moved on. His instincts were that good. For Billie Jean, he mixed it 91 times. 91 different versions of the same song. Each one tweaking the EQ, adjusting the reverb, shifting the balance between the kick drum and the bass line, searching for that perfect combination that would make the song explode out of speakers. And here's what happened. The mixes got worse. With each attempt, Bruce was losing what made the song special. He was overmixing it, as he later admitted, right into the pooper. The clarity was disappearing. The passion was fading. He was so deep in the technical details that he couldn't hear the song anymore. Around mix number 80, Michael Jackson turned to Bruce and said, "That was perfect, but let's try one more." And Bruce, who adored Michael, who understood the obsessive drive for perfection, said no problem and kept going. By mix 91, Quincy Jones walked into the studio. He could hear what was happening. He stopped everything and made a suggestion. "Bruce, just for fun, can we listen to one of your earlier mixes? Let's hear mix number 2. They played it, and it blew everyone away. The room exploded. Everyone was dancing, grooving, acting, as Bruce put it, ignorant. The second mix had everything. It had punch, it had clarity, it had that sonic personality that made you recognize Billie Jean from the first 3 drum hits. Mix number 2 went on Thriller. Mix number 2 became the single. Mix number 2 is the version the entire world knows. The lesson Bruce Sweetin learned that day stayed with him for the rest of his career. Sometimes your first instinct is right. Sometimes more isn't better. Sometimes you have to trust that initial gut reaction, that moment when the song makes you feel something before your brain gets in the way. The Billie Jean that made it onto Thriller in November of 1982 was unlike anything on radio at the time. Bruce Sweetin had Michael sing his vocal overdubs through a 6-foot-long cardboard tube to get that haunting, slightly distant quality in the verses. He built a custom drum platform, raised 10 inches off the floor, to keep the low-frequency sounds from bleeding into other microphones. He put a flat piece of wood between the snare and hi-hat for separation. He even took apart the kick drum, put a cinder block inside it for weight, and created a custom furniture blanket cover with a zippered hole for the microphone. The drums everyone thought were a drum machine? That was a single live take, recorded with extreme isolation techniques that were revolutionary for 1982. Michael's lead vocal was done in one take. Just one. He'd been doing vocal training every morning throughout production, and when it was time to record Billie Jean, he nailed it on the first attempt. And that bass line that Quincy Jones initially didn't like, Daryl Hall of Hall & Oates later revealed that Michael had admitted to him that he borrowed the groove from I Can't Go For That. Michael told Hall directly that he hoped Hall didn't mind that he copped that groove. Hall's response? "Oh, Michael, what do I care? You did it very differently. The song blended post-disco, R&B, funk, dance pop, and new wave into something that sounded futuristic and timeless at the same time. It was dark, where most pop was bright. It was sparse, where most production was dense. It was paranoid, where most songs were celebratory. Billie Jean was a 5-minute nervous breakdown set to a beat, and it was perfect. Billie Jean was released as the second single from Thriller on January 2nd, 1983. Within 3 weeks, it topped the Billboard Hot Black Singles chart. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 7 weeks. It became Michael Jackson's fastest rising #1 single since ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There back in 1970 when he was still with the Jackson 5. But the real battle was with MTV. In 1983, MTV barely played black artists. Their programming was 99% white rock music. When Michael's label submitted the Billie Jean video, MTV refused to air it. The executive said black music didn't fit their format. Walter Yetnikoff, the president of CBS Records, was furious. He called MTV directly and delivered an ultimatum. I'm pulling everything we have off the air, all our product. I'm not going to give you any more videos. And I'm going to go public and tell them about the fact you don't want to play music by a black guy. MTV backed down. They premiered Billie Jean on March 10th, 1983. After the video went into heavy rotation, Thriller sold an additional 10 million copies. Michael Jackson had forced MTV to integrate their playlist, and in doing so, he changed the entire music industry. After Billie Jean, big-budget music videos became essential for artists. The visual component became as important as the music itself. MTV scored its first quarterly profit in 1984, right when Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller were dominating their airwaves. Michael and MTV rode each other to glory, Quincy Jones said years later. The video standard has not changed since then. In June of 2021, Billie Jean became the first 1980s music video by a solo artist to reach 1 billion views on YouTube. The song has been covered by everyone, from Ian Brown to Chris Cornell to Fall Out Boy. It's been remixed by Kanye West. It's played in clubs around the world, in every language, in every country, at the same time every night. Quincy Jones called it like clockwork at the witching hour. Billie Jean won Grammy Awards for Best R&B Song and Best R&B Male Vocal Performance in 1983. It's in the Grammy Hall of Fame. It's on every greatest songs of all time list ever published. With over 10 million copies sold, it's one of the best-selling singles in history. But more than the numbers, more than the awards, Billie Jean proved something essential about Michael Jackson. When he knew he was right, when he could feel that a song was special, he would fight for it against his producer, against conventional wisdom, against anyone who tried to stop him. The song he wrote while his car was on fire, the song Quincy Jones wanted to cut, the song that took 91 mixes to realize the second one was perfect, became the signature track of the greatest album ever made. If you want to hear more untold stories about the legends who changed music history, subscribe to King of Pop and hit that like button. Stay tuned for more content.